Welcome to the far, far range, the perfect getaway for those of you looking to escape their mundane lives, especially if you happen to really love JRPGs in the early game. You see, the far, far range has only 3 types of creatures on it. You, chickens, and slimes, boy! Yes, that's right, slimes. Lovable, friendly slimes. But Ninox, what's an adventurer to do with so many slimes after using them to farm to like level 4? Well, I'm glad you used that wording, unrealistically engaged hypothetical viewer. Farming is right, because we're here to begin our journey as a slime rancher. Slime Rancher is a recently released first-person simulation game? Pseudo-simulation? I'm like 80% sure that slime ranching is not a real thing in the real world that one could simulate, but, you know, just imagine your Stardew Valleys, Harvest Moons, or farming simulators. Replace everything with, you guessed it, slimes, and you're on the right track. So let's start our odyssey as a slime rancher, hopefully talk about something that does not require me to say the word slime for at least a little bit. We begin already settled into a home on the planet known as the Far, Far Range. Rolls right off the tongue. That does also mean that, yes, we're not in Kansas anymore. One of the many sacrifices that has to be made to pursue a career of slime ranching, apparently, is abandoning cozy old Earth. So, you know, hope you aren't attached to Earth, because this is not Earth. But hey, seems like it's got pretty darn similar levels of gravity and oxygen, so you should feel right at home. After a very brief tutorial on how to exist, you'll be free to roam the ranch as you please. You can saunter off to go explore and find slimes to abduct, or you can hardcore parkour on top of a vending machine thing to find that there doesn't seem to be anything stopping you from running around on all the big walls that you'd think were there to keep you boxed into the playable game space. There's this force field that prevents you from entering areas that you haven't officially unlocked, but you're still free to just kind of jaunt around if you want. Doing so might lead you to discovering quirky little shortcuts into other parts of the world that I'm not sure are intentional. In my case, I hopped down into this little corner between properly cut off areas. There was no way around the barriers that surrounded me and no way back on top of everything from here either, leaving me to contemplate exactly which form of suicide would be the... Yeah, I had no choice but to dive into the waters surrounding the play area. Don't worry though, doing so merely knocks you out and you're spawned at your home 12 hours later, no problem, just like in real life. Examining your farm, you'll find plenty of things to do and plenty of goals to work towards. There are those areas that are locked from earlier. Most around seem to just be branch expansion, giving you more space to work with, but they usually have some kind of natural advantages over the basic starting plot of land too, such as more natural food around or having no sunlight, which some creatures prefer. There's a machine which sells you permanent upgrades to your character, like stamina or HP boosts. There's a small place to trade stuff you have for other stuff. There's a market to sell slime products, these kind of crystals your slime will produce called plorts. And of course, there are places to build corrals to house slimes in. Simply vacuum up any that you may find out in the wild, and with an equal amount of love and care, deposit them into a corral and they are now yours forever. Having so many, kept in one place makes it very easy to feed them and collect the crystals they make as a byproduct to sell. You can't sell anything else but these in this game, so this process is essential to furthering your career as a rancher. So let's head out a bit and see what the Far Far Range has to offer. Well, there are plenty of slimes already, but I happen to know that there are other variations besides this super bland pink one, so I'm not going to go crazy snatching all these guys up. And sure enough, it's not long before you're bound to find some different versions, like these blue spiky ones or these cat ones. One interesting thing though is that you can also feed one type of slime a plort from another type, because each slime species makes their own type of plort, which will evolve any other slimes into a giant one with the traits of both. These kinds of slimes, called largos, cannot be vacuumed up like the rest, and they take up a lot more room, of course, but they also produce 2 different types of plorts at once when they're fed, which can be quite useful. Also, it's just fun to see what the combinations of different species end up looking like. If this sounds cool to you, then good news! You'll end up with a lot of these big largo slimes, whether you want to or not. In fact, one thing about this game that I found myself consistently a bit annoyed by, even in the early game when slime variance isn't as high, is that pretty much anywhere you go to, even out in the wild, has enough varieties of species that everything is constantly eating the plorts of everything else, leading to scenes of just madness when things are fighting over food and constantly evolving everywhere. Especially when you have a system where if one already combined slime eats the plorts of a third type, it turns into a monster that will attack and devour everything around it. So often you're just wandering through an area, one that's likely already on the hectic side of things, when you just hear that combat music kick in and turn around to see everything being murdered and eaten alive and evolved into tar monstrosities. It's crazy. It's madness. In the scientific community, I believe the phenomenon is referred to as a clusterfuck. Now, I like adventure as much as the next bloke, but I'm not sure I feel like this game really needed so much chaos and danger. Definitely not danger. I mean, the game is not about winning or staying alive or fighting. It's not a difficult game. I don't think I died to anything other than falling at all during my playthrough. So it's just kind of weird that things get so crazy so often, and personally, I'd be into a more mellow kind of mood for this game. And I figured the whole monster slime system was implemented mostly as a way to ensure that the player has to build different corrals and segregate their creatures from each other so that things aren't just ridiculously easy to manage. There are other enemies in the game too, in the form of aggravated slimes out in the wilderness, so it's not like calming the environment down a bit would mean that there's absolutely no danger or anything. But anyway, moving along and scouting around, I find a couple things of interest. I find a couple ginormous slimes around in the world. These fellas don't seem to move at all, and it seems pretty obvious that you're supposed to come back and feed them enough food until they either give you something or unlock something or what have you. Then there are a bunch of doors, locked doors, throughout the area that are intriguing and cool. There are also some little pod container things littered around like Easter eggs. Even without being able to open them yet, it's fun finding these tucked carefully behind obstructions and just out of sight. They really do feel like actual Easter eggs, which I'm into. It's not long before I scrounge up enough nearby food to satiate one of the giant unmoving slimes. And yeah, indeed, you do seem to get an item of great value for doing so. A key! Now, as soon as I figure out what it could possibly belong to, I'll get right on that. In the meantime, though, I head back and tuck away this little rock slime into this habitat cage thing that I built for him. Make sure he's plenty cozy and has enough room to stretch his legs. And okay, yes, I go and open one of the doors that this key clearly unlocks. This takes me to a new biome filled with a bunch of new species of slime. The moss blanket has all of the classic types of slimes you're already familiar with, but in addition, it also has obnoxious exploding ones, water ones, and honey ones. I particularly liked those, so I released my rock slimes into the wild and used their corral instead to house these new ones. Back in the jungle, I discover a little island of these invisible dudes too, which seem pretty rad, but I can't actually find any of them that aren't already fused with honey slimes. Looking back on it, I'm not sure why I wanted a purebred invisible slime so badly, but I kept that in mind as one of my goals going forward. Maybe it's just that they seem so rare that made me want to have some? I don't know. There was this giant invisible guy hanging out on a mushroom, and I noticed the last time I fed one of these things that it exploded into proper small versions of itself, so I figured this might be a good way to get what I wanted. I'd definitely have to remember to come back sometime with like a million chickens and see if I was right. And it would have to be chickens because each slime only has one type of food that it will eat. Well, most of them. The basic slimes will eat anything, and the fused largo slimes are okay with all the food that either of the two used to make it would be, but otherwise it seems to be a specific food type per species, and there are 3 food types in this game. Vegetables, fruit, and meat, which means chickens. The system isn't super deep or anything, but it keeps you from just being able to grow a million of the same food type for all purposes, which would obviously be super boring. And actually, I'm just gonna skip ahead and spoil how the whole chicken feeding thing went. It went. I was right about the reward, and I got a few of those stealthy pure hunter slimes as a treat for my efforts. I wanted these guys to be the mascot of my farm, but I didn't end up with enough to be able to really do that. I guess this is fine though. I bring them back, tuck them into their new home, nice and cozy, send out a couple emails to start production on the plushies, you know, the works. So by now I've got my farm built up a little bit, and I've collected a couple keys from exploring around the world. Got my lovely fruit trees over on one side here, slimes mostly on the other, and then I have some more pretty much shunned and ignored ones in the cave over yonder. Pretty much the dark basement housing everything I don't really like or pay attention to. I'm earning a little bit of money from my slimes, enough to make a steady progress on upgrades and expansion, but I don't know if I think that actually maintaining a farm is one of this game's high points. I don't know if this is what I would consider to be the fun part. I think it's perhaps a lack of options, really. You can only build on specific plots of land, and what you can build is pretty much either pens to house slimes or places to store/grow food to feed slimes. Gardens are pretty uninvolved. You just toss a food into it and then that crop will grow for the rest of time. And slimes themselves are not very interactive or complex either. You pretty much don't have a single thing to worry about once you've got a safe place to lock them in. They just exist to be fed food so that they can produce splorts. When constructing a zone to cage your slimes, you've got several options for upgrades. In my experience, these upgrades are pretty much either mandatory or totally useless. Like, if you're ever housing more than 2 slimes per space, you seem to not have an option on if you want high walls or not. If you don't get that, then your slimes are just gonna hop out, make their great escape, end of story, and that's complete chaos. Same with the ceiling net. If you don't get that, great escape, complete chaos. There are some options to make your life easier, I suppose, so these are good middle grounds between being useless and mandatory. There's an auto feeder and an auto plort collector. This pretty much just allows you to keep the harvesting process going on even when you're out in the world exploring. Then on the other hand, there are upgrades like the music player, which apparently is there to help with soothing the slimes. I picked up this upgrade quite a few times, but I never noticed a difference at all. And it's not like there's anything that your slimes can really do if they're agitated. Most of the time I had an auto collector, so I didn't even need to enter the cage. But you can also calm moody slimes down with food, and since food is kind of necessary for them to make plorts anyway, they'll likely be fed most of the time. There's not a whole lot of other management going on around the farm either, and I'm sure that this is still plenty enjoyable for those that like just having something to chip away at while they relax, as the whole cycle of harvesting plorts can still take a lot of time and planning, but I think that for me personally, I would have liked there to be a little more going on under the hood here. So most of the time I tend to be out in the world looking for new things to discover. I come across another door to open from the jungle, but instead of leading to a new biome completely, I found myself in some ancient looking ruins with these big statues of different kinds of species of slime, and a giant corresponding door waiting to be unlocked. Not with a key though, but there's clearly a connection with the many statues around the site. Somehow I don't think that I realized what I needed to do here at first. I thought that the first time I entered this place that I tried shooting a plort at one of the statues, but looking back on the footage now, I guess not. So I pretty much ignored this cool area for way longer than I should have and just continued to faff about elsewhere. I got into a pretty consistent routine of going out, collecting some slimes in the wild, returning to my farm to collect food, to feed my guys, to get plorts, to sell plorts, to upgrade my farm and gardens, to grow more food while I head out to collect more slimes and maybe earn a key or two. At this point, I'm most definitely settled into the core Slime Rancher experience, I would say. There are still some important aspects of the Rancher life I've yet to unlock. There's this whole engineering side of the game that I'll get to in a little bit, but even with that, the core loop of Slime Rancher is, it's ranching slimes. And it definitely can be a great way to kick back and relax. Probably a great option while you chat with friends or listen to a podcast or something. But anyway, my super rare and cool hunter slimes were at some point infected by their neighbor honey slimes. So I guess this is why we can't have nice things, guys. Thanks. Adventuring out has been fun, but I'm starting to become overly familiar with most of the zones I've unlocked so far. Though I did quite enjoy that the game would sometimes have smaller sections that felt different from the main biome they were housed in. When I say this, I'm only really referring to this section of caves that exists in the quarry biome. Most of the outside biome is full of these cold blues and starry skies, so it's cool that you can enter this small area that feels warm and cut off. It even has its own variation of slime that you can't find outside. I think this small bit of map design goes a long way to breaking up the homogenized feeling that can crop up in the areas, and I only wish that there were more areas like this. These slimes also happen to make one of the more valuable plorts, which is nice, and gave me enough money to be able to buy access to the lab, which is a section of your farm that not only offers new spaces to build on, but more importantly gives you access to the lab. So here's where the game opens up a bit more. Suddenly you have the ability to start building your own gadgets, which can do a variety of different things. There's an entire new set of resources introduced here too, in materials that you collect from machines you can place around the world. There are different machines that are meant to be used in the different biomes of the map, and each one collects for you items that are required for building other gadgets down the line. Gadgets like teleporters, item teleporters, and plenty of aesthetic items that you can use to finally personalize your home a bit. Problem with these is that, just like with placing gardens or cages for slimes, you're limited in where you can actually put these in the world. To be honest, when I went to place my first decoration only to find that I was restricted to very specific predetermined points, it pretty much instantly killed my enthusiasm for the mechanic. But I don't think that it would be controversial to say that having the ability to just put what you want wherever you want would be better. It also takes plenty of materials to even make the most simple decorations, so at this point, if you're like me, you realize that you really should have been collecting all types of slimes instead of just a few of your favorites, because all of the plorts are pretty necessary in crafting. You also need plenty of money to buy blueprints for these craftable items in the first place, but there are ways to get blueprints aside from disgusting capitalism as well. Turns out that all of those little egg pod things out in the world tend to contain blueprints, especially for the decorations. So that's a pretty fun way to get yourself started if you're a little low on funds. So this is the kind of second phase of the game, I suppose. I started looping back around the places I'd already seen, toying with placing gadgets, and of course, popping open the little Easter egg pods. You actually still can't open all of them immediately because they're separated into different tiers though, so maybe it's better to just wait until you can unlock all of them before going on this hunt, if you have the patience. I don't really know, because I didn't. It was around this time that I stumbled upon those ruins again, and realized that I'm actually the dumbest human. This time I tried placing a plort into the extremely plort-shaped slots on the statues again, because that has to be what you're supposed to do here, right? And it is. I was a little sad that it took me so long to get into this area that I could have accessed hours ago, but at least I did eventually crack basically the toughest puzzle ever programmed into a video game. Are you proud of me? This leads to another biome, and you might be like, oh hey, wow, cool, but you wouldn't even realize what a fool you are. These ruins are cool, sure, but that's how they get ya. You were so distracted by silly things like slime history and slimes with the ability to manipulate time and space, oh so cool, that you didn't even notice this room tucked in the back here, did you? Well, my friend, if you thought you'd seen it all, then feast your eyes upon the glass desert. So this is cool. This really does feel like a different world from where you've been adventuring so far, and it's not just because it looks so different. This place is actually filled with a lot of unique gameplay mechanics that tie into the environment around you. And of course it has a lot of new interesting slimes too. This place has got these storms that would kick up and send fire down from the skies, which looks pretty metal and encourages you to seek cover in some of the enclosed spaces around. It's not a thing that happens so often that it becomes annoying, just enough, I thought, to give the zone some character and some life to it. It's also not a dangerous enough thing that you have to wait for the storm to pass if you want to move from one place to the other, which is nice. On top of this, the Glass Desert also has a cool mechanic where you can bring some livelihood back to the world here by interacting with these small plants around. First, you've got to figure out what to even do, but you'll eventually spot statues like the ones that gave you access to the ruins before. These are scattered throughout the zone, and finding the corresponding plorts and bringing them back gives you access to a well nearby, with a very special water that you can use to revitalize the plants, which in turn restores the nearby area to a thriving state and spawns all of the animals and activity you'd normally expect. And it gives you this cool sense of progression and influence that's not really present elsewhere in the world. I really like this zone. It's interesting. It feels more like a DLC add-on to the game instead of an area planned from the start, because it's totally separated from the rest of the game and because it does introduce all of these unique mechanics. I think this is definitely the best zone in the game, and it's well placed as the last one too. It would be great if all of the zones could be as involved as this one and with a sense of identity like this one, but if there can only be one like this, then I do think that it's wise to place it at the end of the game so that the interesting new stuff to do gives a kind of second wind to the player interest. I was honestly pretty done with the game by the time I stumbled upon the Glass Desert. I spent as little time in the ruins as I could because my interest in Slime Rancher as a whole had mostly dried up, but this part of the map kept me playing and kept the game fun. Apparently the developers still have areas and content that they plan to add to the game, which is cool seeing as how the title isn't in early access anymore and it's considered firmly, out. I wouldn't expect the new stuff to be quite as substantive as the Glass Desert, which just feels like the main kind of important endgame area, especially when it contains the conclusion to just about the only story you can follow in the game. But I do hope that the new content takes some cues from this place and feels kind of like its own thing. I enjoyed the last bit of my time with the game that I spent snatching up the slimes from this area and restoring this place to its former glory, and that was pretty much my experience with Slime Rancher. Not the most extensive experience anyone's ever had with the game, I'm sure, but I feel like I've lived the life I was promised and got to do everything I would hope for. I ranched quite a lot of slimes, didn't I? I did. So, I guess thanks for watching me, Ninox, the master of ending videos smoothly. Thank you, I appreciate it. This is the end of the video now. As I'm sure you could tell by the smooth transition, you never even saw it coming. Or wait, or you did see it coming. Because it was like foreshadowed properly. I guess that's it. And have a good day, yeah? Don't forget to eat healthy. Don't forget to floss.